Hey, so I wanted to show how you can use Rust to build a REST API and deploy it to AWS API Gateway. So yeah, let's get started. Let's go ahead and initialize our project. And to do that, we're going to just create a folder and cd into it. And we're going to use CDK to deploy the API. So let's go ahead and use that. Great. So that's done. Let's go ahead and open Visual Studio Code. And we can see that we have our Git repository initialized. So now we can start creating our REST API. So let's go ahead and use cargo. Yeah, let's call it API. So when you create a new project using cargo, it's automatically going to create a Git repository, but we already have Git initialized in this folder. So we're going to go ahead and give it the option of saying there's no version control system. And there we go. So our project is created, and let's take a look. API. So I forgot to do one thing. I'm just going to go ahead and delete this, and we'll start over because I made a small mistake. So we want to initialize this as a library instead of a binary. So that's perfect. So now let's talk about the packages that we're going to be using. Okay, we're going to use POEM. We're going to use the OpenAPI project. That's part of the POEM system. We're using Tokio. We're going to use POEM Lambda to be able to deploy our application. And I think that's pretty much it. Oh wait, we should also use Serde and Serde JSON. Now that we've done that, let's also go ahead and say that we'll specify a couple of binaries. Bootstrap and and we'll specify the path for this. This path doesn't exist yet, but this is the binary that we're going to compile when we want to deploy it as a Lambda, but then we'll create another binary that's going to be for just running everything locally. So let's just call it main. And I'll just call it main. There we go. Okay, now that we've created the two files, let's make sure that they exist. That's the first file, and then the second file. So before we proceed, let's take a quick look at the POEM documentation. And we are going to look at one of the examples and use that as a basis. So going down to Hello World. No, maybe we should use the OpenAPI example instead, because I think that's a little bit more of an interesting API example. So yeah, let's go ahead and copy this whole file, and we're going to go over to the library. Let's get rid of the tests for now, or actually just comment them out. Maybe we'll do test-driven, or actually add a few tests, but maybe not. We will see. So we don't actually need this main function, so let's comment it out for now. And we're just going to go ahead and say, yeah, so let's make sure that, actually before we do anything, so if you just have this in a main file and you run it, you basically have your API endpoint that's running locally, and all of your, well, basically your API runs locally. But let's take a quick look at the other example over here. Let's go over to Lambda. Okay, perfect. Yeah. So as you can see, in order to run it as a Lambda, we use the run function that's inside of the Poem Lambda library. And in order to run it just from the console as a normal application, we use the Poem server instead. And we create the TCP listener on that particular port. So, and that's the server that provides the run function. So whichever approach you take, you'll have to make sure that we're basically extract out a method that can provide us the routes. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's call it app. And we can get rid of this because we don't need it anymore. Let's comment it out for now. We'll just say get app, and that's going to be returning the app for us. It's basically a route. Awesome. And we don't need this. Let's get rid of this. And right, I forgot to add another library, so let's go ahead and do that in our cargo file. So tracing subscriber, let's go ahead and do that. There it is. So where are we? Okay, perfect. Let's just run cargo. Should have picked it up by now. Looks like it hasn't. One second. Okay, that's been fixed. I just had to reload my Visual Studio. Okay, so now that we have our app, let's go into the main file, and we're going to go ahead and set up a server to run it locally. So we'll use Tokyo main, and we'll set this up. So that we can there we go. So we need to get app. Oops. And then let's fix our imports. And then we can remove whatever we're not using. Oops, we don't use any of these. And then we could do that. Perfect. Okay, so we want to import our app. So in order to do that, let's go ahead into the cargo toml. So we have the package name is API, so let's go ahead and use that. And once we have it, we should be able to get app, but we can't because this is not public. Perfect. Okay. Let's go ahead and try it out. Cargo run, and then let's give it the binary main. Oh, wrong folder. Lambda API, and let's try it again. Okay, it took a while to build, but here it is. It's complaining about some unused imports, but we don't really care about that right now. So I'm going to go to localhost 3000, and there we have our app. So we can go to API hello, and it's basically working. So now we have a system where we can actually run it locally to do our debugging. And let's talk about how we can deploy this to API Gateway using a Lambda setup. Okay, so in order to deploy it as Lambda, we're going to need to rely on this particular method. So let's import it. And where is this? Lost track of it. Okay, perfect. So we also need a main function. we are going to need to get app. So use API, and we're good to go. Okay, so let's just go ahead and build. Okay, great, it built. So in order to build the Lambda project, we're going to use the Rust serverless Docker image, and the script, I'm going to put it in the GitHub repo in the end. It's going to be here. Sorry. We're basically going to run this command while in the Lambda API folder. What this is going to do is it's going to compile, it's going to basically build both main and bootstrap projects, and it's going to throw the zip files in the release branch, sorry, in the release folder. This is going to take a while to build, so we'll just come back when it's done. Great, so it built. So let's go ahead and take a look at, let's just try to run this locally and we'll see whether it works or not. So in order to run it, I have another script that I got from the AWS repo. And I'm going to share this later as well in the final repo. So let's, oh yeah, I copied it from somewhere else, so it's my own other example. Okay, so let's just run it and see if it works. So in order to run this, we can use the, oops, we'll go ahead and select the Lambda release bootstrap, and then let's run it. Okay, so at this point, Lambda is listening for a request. We are going to just give it a example request over here, hit enter, and then Control D to exit out. Uh, yeah, it looks like they're having some issues with the tracing subscriber. So let's just remove that requirement and then come back and try it again. Okay, so let's get rid of this. And we'll comment this out. And it's possible that the error has to do with the fact that we're initializing it twice, but for now, let's not worry too much about it. And we can also remove these unused imports. So we have to build it again. Let's go ahead into the appropriate directory and let's run this command again to build it. Okay, it's going to take a while. Okay, looks like it worked. Let's just try to run it again locally. And we'll give it a sample response. And we can see that, hey, it's not found. But it's interesting because one of the routes is the base route. So we should have seen some kind of response with just standard HTML. That's for the Swagger endpoint. The reason why it doesn't work while we set it up in the Lambda runtime is because of the, well, first I need to make sure I'm giving the correct path. Let me go and fix that. So let's make sure we're giving it the right path. So this is my example. I was using it for something else. So just go ahead and replace all three of them to null. So we know for a fact that we're giving it a empty line, but sorry, the base route. So it's still not found. So we're expecting to find something, right? The reason why it doesn't work is because API Gateway is using this as the host, and it's going to use the stage as the base route before appending the rest of the request path. So what it's going to end up being, it's going to be the stage is production, so it's prod slash API slash whatever, right? So whatever we put in the path goes over here. So what's happening is that Poem is seeing that the request is starting on prod, and that's why it's not able to find it. So in order to make that requirement satisfied, so we'll just go to route, new, uh, and then we'll say nest prod, and then we'll put the rest of this, the entire app, in this subroute. So we'll go ahead and build it again and just come back to try it out and see if this works this time around. Okay, so that built. Let's go ahead and run it again locally. Okay, this time I hope we get a response back, and we do get a response back. So let's go ahead and try it with the path API hello, and we'll make sure that is the path on all three sections. Let's run it again, and yeah, hello. That's exactly what we wanted to see. Okay, so now that we've seen it work locally and in the local execution of Lambda, we can try to start setting up our CI/CD to deploy it to API Gateway. So to do that, let's go ahead into some TypeScript code to write our CDK stuff. And for that, we're going to need, oh, sorry, we're going to import Lambda and Gateway. We are going to import, no, that's pretty much it. Okay, so let's remove all of this code. So the target needs to be this, basically, in order to be able to compile it properly for a Lambda runtime execution. Lambda runtime. So let's go ahead and give it. So you're gonna have to excuse me to you that I'm copying over some of my older examples. So I was calling it pets, but I'm gonna call this example in Rust. So just call it Lambda handler. So what this is doing is it's going into the current folder, which is this particular directory, and it's going to make sure that it uses the latest Rust Docker image and build our Lambdas. So once it's done, it's going to use the bundled asset as the Lambda code asset. So basically, this will take care of getting the bootstrap.zip and also packaging it up so that CDK can deploy our API. Let's also set up our API gateway. I'm going to call it example API, example API. And instead of using the REST API, we're actually going to remove this and we'll use Lambda REST API, and there we go. The handler is going to be our Lambda handler. I think that should be all that's required. Okay, let's just go back up 2 folders and we'll do what is the command to? Yep, npm run CDK. Let's just see whether the synth command works. So for those that don't know how CDK works, what CDK is, essentially CDK synth is taking our programmatic TypeScript code and compiling it into a CloudFormation template. So it's going to take a while to do the synth as well. Looks like the error happened. Right. All right, I'm just going to use API. So I think I was using I was using the function name to figure out the path to find the actual code. So I'm just going to use API. Actually, no. Let's just remove that parameter. Release. Right. We want to use the bundle. Sorry. Bootstrap. Let's try this. I think this should work. So um, my function on AWS is going to be still called example in Rust, but this time around I'm CDing into the correct folder. We're building it, and after it's built, we're going to be using the Bootstrap binary and packaging it up. I think that should work. Great. So it looks like the synth command worked. So why don't we try to just deploy it? We'll see what happens. And the very first time we deploy anything to CDK, it's going to ask us permissions to go ahead and um, create the necessary resources. Let's just say yes. Okay, so it deployed. Let's give it a shot. There it is. So even though it generated a Swagger documentation, if I try this, it's just not going to work because it's currently pointed to the localhost. But in order to show you, let's go ahead and go to the hello route. We can also give it a name, hello there. So yeah, so it is working now. Just basically set up a single Lambda API Gateway type setup where all the routes get automatically routed to a single Lambda, and we just have to use the routing that's provided by the POEM framework to match your routes and run the necessary responses. I hope this helps someone. I'm going to put up all the links and resources that I used to figure this out. Um, yeah, good luck. And there's one thing I wanted to mention. So there's a lot of different libraries out there. There's Rocket, there is Axum, there's a couple other ones too. I've tried a few of the libraries, and none of them were quite working well for me. So I'm sure if you guys can figure it out, then just share it back with me, and I'll be happy to learn from you. Um, Poem just worked out of the box because it gave me the three things that I cared about: having a Swagger endpoint, having routing, and having a scenario where I can test things locally and also deploy it with relative ease. So that's why I ended up choosing Poem. I'm sure other frameworks also work, but this is where I'm at.